The great hall of Valemore had never been this quiet. Hundreds of wolves stood along the marble walls, their breath held, their eyes fixed on the girl standing alone before the throne. Nobody in that kingdom had ever refused the Alpha King. Nobody dared to. Elira Voss did not move. Her hands were still stained faintly with dried blood from the wound she had closed only hours earlier. Her chin was lifted, her shoulders straight, though her heart pounded so hard she was certain the whole room could hear it. King Draven Ashborn sat above her on a throne carved from black stone, his eyes the color of a winter storm. He had ruled for 300 years, inheriting not just a crown but the weight of a bloodline that had never known defiance. His voice, when it came, was low and even, more dangerous than any shout. "You healed a rebel," he said, "without my permission. You know the law." "I know a man was dying," Elira answered. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied. "I know that if I had waited for permission, he would have been dead before the ink dried on the paper." A murmur rippled through the court. No one spoke to the king this way. No one lived long after they tried. Draven leaned forward slightly. "Then you admit your guilt." "I admit I saved a life," she said. "If that is a crime in your kingdom, then your kingdom has forgotten what a crown is for." The murmur turned to gasps. Somewhere near the back, an old wolf named General Corwin closed his eyes, as if bracing for what was about to happen. Guards on either side of the throne room shifted their weight, waiting for a single word from their king. Draven rose slowly from his throne. "Kneel," he said. "Swear your loyalty to me, here, before this court, and I will forget this insolence." Elira's knees wanted to bend. Every instinct in her body, every drop of wolf blood in her veins, screamed at her to obey. It was not just fear. It was something deeper, something bred into every wolf born under his rule, a pull toward the throne that felt almost like gravity. She fought it. "I will not kneel to a king who lets his people bleed out over paperwork," she said. For a moment, the entire hall seemed to stop breathing. Draven's eyes narrowed. He had spent 3 centuries being obeyed instantly, without question, without hesitation. He did not know what to do with a woman who looked at him and saw not a king, but a man who had lost sight of his purpose. "Guards," he said quietly, "take her." 2 wolves in silver armor stepped forward, their boots echoing against the stone floor. Elira did not run. She had made her choice the moment she pressed her hands to the rebel's wound, and she would not dishonor it now by fleeing. The guards were 3 steps away when the torches along the hall began to flicker. At first, it looked like a draft, nothing more than a breeze slipping through an open window, but then the flames turned from orange to a pale, silver blue, and the air grew cold in a way that had nothing to do with weather. The guards stopped in their tracks. The whispers in the court died instantly. A light began to gather above Elira's head, soft at first, then blooming outward, like the first rays of moonrise breaking over a dark hill. It was not harsh. It did not burn. It simply was, ancient and quiet and impossibly present, filling the hall with a glow that made every torch and candle look dim by comparison. Every wolf in the room, from the newest guard to the king himself, felt something ancient stir in their bones. Their legs bent before they understood why. One by one, they dropped to their knees, not out of fear of their king, but out of something far older, a reverence carried in their blood since the first wolves walked beneath the moon. Draven remained standing a moment longer than the rest, gripping the arm of his throne, before even he felt his knee buckle beneath him. He knelt, stunned, staring at the girl who stood untouched in the center of the light. A voice filled the hall. It was not loud, yet it reached every corner, every ear, as if it spoke directly inside each mind. "I am Selûne," the voice said. "You know me as the moon goddess. You have forgotten me, Draven Ashborn, though your ancestors swore an oath in my name." The king's throat tightened. He had heard stories of the goddess as a child, prayers whispered by his grandmother, old songs sung at moon festivals that had slowly faded out of practice during his reign. He had believed, as most of his court believed, that she was a legend, a comfort for the old and the frightened, not a presence that could still walk among them. "This woman," Selûne continued, and the light around Elira brightened, "is the last living descendant of the moon priestesses. Her blood carries the same gift, that once stood beside the very first Alpha King, not beneath him, but beside him, as an equal voice in the shaping of this kingdom. Illyra's breath caught. She had grown up an orphan on the edges of Valemore, raised by an old healer who taught her how to stitch wounds and brew fevers away. No one had ever told her she carried anything more than a steady hand and a stubborn heart. "You do not understand," Draven said, his voice rough, unfamiliar even to himself. He was not used to speaking to anyone as an equal, let alone a goddess. "My throne answers to no one." "Your throne," Selûne said, and there was something almost sorrowful in her voice now, was built on a promise. "Long ago, your bloodline was given great power under one condition. A priestess would always stand free to challenge the crown, to speak when the king could not see his own blindness. That promise has been broken for generations. Laws have replaced compassion. Fear has replaced trust. Tonight, a healer broke an unjust law to save a life, and you called it treason." The words landed heavily across the hall. Several of the older wolves, the ones who remembered stories from their own grandparents, lowered their heads not in submission, but in something closer to shame. Draven looked at Illyra properly for the first time, not as a prisoner awaiting judgment, but as a woman who had stood alone against everything he represented, and had not backed down, even when death seemed certain. "What do you want from me?" he asked, and for the first time in 300 years, his voice held no command in it at all. "I want nothing from you," Selûne answered. "I have already given what was needed." The light around Illyra gathered at her wrist, spinning slowly, and settled into the shape of a crescent moon, glowing faintly silver against her skin. It was not a burn, it did not hurt, it simply belonged there, as if it had always been waiting to appear. "This mark," Selûne said, "protects her from harm by any hand loyal to this crown. No king, no guard, no law of Valemore may touch her without answering to me. She is free to speak, free to challenge, free to stand where your ancestors once welcomed such voices." The light began to fade, drawing back into the torches, which slowly returned to their normal amber glow. The cold left the air. The silence that remained afterward was different from the silence before, heavier, filled with the weight of something that had just changed forever. Selûne's presence lifted from the hall, leaving no trace behind except the mark on Illyra's wrist, and the memory pressed into every wolf who had knelt without meaning to. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, the court began to rise, uncertain, glancing toward their king, for some sign of how to feel, what to believe, what came next. Draven rose last of all. He walked down the steps of his throne, past the guards who had frozen mid-step only minutes before, until he stood in front of Illyra. Up close, she looked smaller than she had from the throne, and yet somehow larger than anyone else in the room. "You could have simply knelt," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "It would have been easier." "Easier is not always right," she said. He studied her face, searching for the fear he expected to find there, the same fear every other wolf in his kingdom carried when they looked at him. He found none. Only steadiness, and something tired beneath it, the exhaustion of a woman who had spent all night saving a stranger's life, and then spent the morning defending her right to have done so. "My ancestors welcomed voices like yours," he said slowly, as if testing the words for the first time. "I have never known anyone who would dare offer one." "Then perhaps," Illyra said, "it is time your kingdom remembered how to listen." A ripple of quiet reaction passed through the court, though no one dared to speak aloud. Draven glanced back at his advisors, at Corwin, at the guards who had nearly dragged Illyra away only minutes before. He saw uncertainty in their faces, but also something else, something that looked almost like relief, as though a weight they had carried without naming had finally been given a voice. He turned back to Illyra and extended his hand, palm up, an offering rather than a command. "Stay," he said, "not as a prisoner, not as someone I control, as the court's first priestess advisor in 300 years. Help me remember what my line was meant to protect." Illyra looked at his hand. She thought of the rebel scout she had healed the night before, his ragged breathing slowing under her care, his eyes filled with a fear that had nothing to do with his wound, and everything to do with a kingdom that had taught him healers were dangerous, and laws were absolute. She thought of every person on the outskirts of Valemore who lived in the same fear, waiting for permission to be helped, waiting for a king who might never come. She thought of the mark glowing faintly on her wrist, a promise she had not asked for, but could not deny. "I did not come here to be part of your court," she said honestly. "I came here to keep someone alive." "I know," Draven said. "That is exactly why I am asking." The hall waited in silence, guards and nobles alike watching the space between the king's outstretched hand and the healer who had refused to kneel. It was not the ending anyone had expected when the night began. It was not a punishment. It was not a pardon. It was something new, something neither of them fully understood yet, standing fragile and uncertain in the space where an old law had just been broken open by an older promise. Illyra did not take his hand right away. She looked past him, toward the doors of the hall, where beyond the walls of the castle, the moon still hung bright and steady over Valemore, watching, as it always had, over every soul who lived beneath its light. Then she looked back at Draven, at the king who had knelt without meaning to, who now stood waiting, not with the certainty of command, but with the quiet hope of a man asking for a chance to do better. "I will stay," she said finally, "not because you are my king, because someone has to remind you what that word is supposed to mean." Draven's hand remained open, and slowly, Illyra placed hers into it. The court exhaled as one, a long breath held since the moment the torches had first turned silver. Somewhere above them, unseen but not forgotten, the moon watched the beginning of something that would reshape Valemore for generations to come, not through conquest or fear, but through a single refusal that no one, not even a king, had been able to ignore.